Hi guys, in today's video I'm going to be talking about the stock market, the US economy, fiat currency in general, crypto, and the US government. And so just up front here I'm going to make a few predictions. I'm not going to go through the technical analysis, I just want to get it all out there at the beginning because I know a lot of people don't really vibe with the technical analysis, or at least it gets too complex. So anyways, the things that seem to be happening seem to signal a potential weakening or crash of the stock market sometime between now and the end of May 2022. Specifically, April 12th of 2022 is a very interesting day with regards to that, as well as other things in general. But yeah, also a weakening of fiat in general, and possibly that politicians may, well, I don't want to say any specific opinions on this, but basically the current issue in like Ukraine and Russia, it looks like there's potential that like global leaders and stuff could basically, due to issues related to the whole Ukraine-Russia issue, they may start to like put forth emergency economic decisions of some sort, that have like global effects or like are quite pivotal decisions that normally wouldn't be made so quickly, but they'll probably say that like, oh, because of the Ukraine-Russia issue, we have to like push this through and it has to be done now, or whatever. And then also a transition to crypto, which we're already beginning to see, but I think it's going to take place a little bit quicker than most people think, at least in my opinion. And we could start to see that sometime between now through the end of April, and then also throughout May. Specifically, April 30th is an interesting day, but yeah, in the month following April 30th, we could see some big changes, like a new beginning related to crypto, perhaps like something like, oh, crypto's like now going to be, a globally accepted currency, or like many different countries start to like put out regulations related to it, making it more official or something. And then also finally a weakening of the US government, the Biden administration, and possible changes in power or control related to the US. So those are the predictions, and we can get into the astrology technical bit. Okay, so just to like quickly give a little summary about like astrology and stuff. This is the chart of the United States of America. We're just going to use this as an example to explain like the whole thing, like what astrology is all about, the whole predictive side of it. So this is the United States of America. It was founded on July 4th of 1776. So on that date, this chart will show us the positions of the celestial bodies on that date and at this time. And then if you want to do prediction, you're going to look at where the transiting planets, which shows like the current locations of the celestial bodies, are in relation to whatever it is you're looking at. So as you can see, like for an example here, this shows the transits for March 10th of 2022. You can see that the natal Pluto, which is like the location of the natal placement of the celestial body in the chart of the United States for 1776, was at 27 degrees of Capricorn. And you can see that the transiting Pluto, which is like the current location of Pluto on March 10th of 2022, is at about 27 degrees of Capricorn. I think it's actually at 28 degrees, but yeah. So this is considered a Pluto return, and I'll get into that in a second. But this is just to show you that like these green like planets here, or celestial bodies, they just show the position of where they are in the sky, according to the date that you put here. Okay, so progressions works like a day for a year formula. So normally the sun moves only a degree every day, about a degree every day. And so like if we look at this chart and we look at the start of the United States, like the creation of it, you can see that on July 4th of 1776, at about 4:50 p.m. Philadelphia time, the sun was at 13 degrees of Cancer. Now, if you wanted to look at the progress chart for 1 year after the creation of the United States, it would only show you the chart for the next day after the creation of the United States. So then, like, the sun is only, in a progress chart, the sun is only going to move 1 degree for every year that you're looking at. The only thing that moves pretty quickly in the progress chart is the moon. And so yeah, that's just to show you progressed aspects. They take a really long time to come about, but progressions will show you bigger events in the life of whatever it is you're looking at. If you look at the chart of the New York Stock Exchange, NYSE, you'll see that the sun of NYSE is actually at 27 degrees of Taurus, meaning that the eclipse I just talked about that happened on November 19th of 2022 was conjunct the sun of NYSE. So that indicates pivotal events for NYSE as well as Biden, because they both have suns that are being hit by the same eclipse cycle, essentially. So sun of NYSE was hit exactly by this eclipse on November 19th of 2022. Then the next eclipse in that cycle, or that kind of matches that previous eclipse in 2021, is going to be at 25 degrees of Scorpio, and that one will occur on May 16th of 2022, and it will oppose the sun of NYSE by 2 degrees. So this is interesting to me because this also happens to coincide with a lot of other events that are happening, or like concerning transits that are impacting the chart of NYSE. But yeah, this particular date is very interesting because you also have this like stellium hitting the midheaven. So you have Jupiter at like 1 degree of Aries, so it's not exactly on the midheaven, but then you have Mars, which is the planet of volatility, and whenever it hits the midheaven of NYSE or transits through the 10th house, that's when you can expect a lot of volatility. So this is an interesting date to keep in mind for sure, this May 16th of 2022, because Mars is going to be conjunct Neptune on the midheaven of NYSE shortly after this time, or like during this time and shortly after. So anyways, back to NYSE in general. If we look at March 14th of 2022, like right now, you'll see that we have the sun and Neptune conjunct the midheaven of NYSE at 22 degrees. Now keep in mind that there are a couple different times, there's more than a couple different times used for the chart of the New York Stock Exchange, but the ones that I've found to be most reliable are usually around this time, and specifically the degrees around 22 to 24 of Pisces. That's like the range where I think the midheaven of NYSE is, just based off of like historical records and like events that happened. As well as just like my own observations as well. So anyways, March 14th of 2022, you can see that Neptune is at like about 22 degrees of Pisces. If we look down specifically, it's at 22 degrees, 54 minutes of Pisces. So it is like exactly conjunct the midheaven of NYSE. And the sun is also at 23 degrees of Pisces, so it's closely conjunct that. So it's important to keep in mind that the midheaven of any chart that you're looking at is going to represent the public social standing, the reputation, what's apparent in the outer world in relation to that subject. Basically, it's how things appear on the outside, essentially. So normally in a natal chart, you would relate this point to a person's career, public social standing, reputation, success, accomplishments, etc. But in the chart of the New York Stock Exchange, this could kind of relate to more like their outer appearance in the outer world, how they're looking in general to everybody else on the outside. And it's important to note that Neptune rules the midheaven of NYSE, so it's quite strong to be, in this sign as well as conjunct this point. Because Neptune rules Pisces, so it rules the midheaven. But anyways, also Neptune is known as the planet of deception, of like lies, deceit, whatever is like hidden or secret, or just like kind of, like hidden. You know what I mean? Whatever people don't know about. It's also like I said, deception, illusion, trickery, things like that are ruled by Neptune, as well as like dreams, fantasy, illusions. So Neptune can often be associated with like lies or like things, whenever you think things are too good to be true, whenever things are too good to be true. So it's very interesting to have Neptune transiting the midheaven of NYSE, because it's kind of like deception, like things like fraud, deception, etc., are going to be like influencing the public reputation and like what is apparent in the outer world in relation to the New York Stock Exchange. And so like the last time, I wanted to look at the last time that this had happened, because actually Neptune has the second slowest orbit out of all of the celestial bodies that we use in astrology. So that's why this particular period of time is so like interesting in history, because not only do we have like that Pluto return that I was talking about here, which takes 248 years to happen, but at the same time we also have Neptune transiting Neptune, which takes 165 years to orbit, hitting the midheaven of NYSE. And the last time that happened, it only ever happened once, another time in history, was 1857. July of 1857 was when it was at 22 degrees. And if you look back at history and see what happened at around that time, just to like get a general idea of what could happen now, potentially, we had the Panic of 1857. So exactly in around July of 1857, which was when Neptune was like at 22 degrees of Pisces, this was when railroad stock values peaked. So this is important because in 1857, at that time, just like to give some background info here, leading up to this point, the railroad industry had been like booming due to large migrations of people to the west, especially to like Kansas. So the large influx of people made the railroads a profitable industry, and the banks began to provide railroad companies with large loans. Many of the companies never made it past the stage of a paper railroad, and never owned the physical assets necessary to like create or run a real railroad. So prices of railroad stocks as a whole began to experience a stock bubble. So yeah, that was what happened the last time we had Neptune conjuncting the midheaven. Just as a quick summary. Now we're about to have it again, as I was saying, or we've been having it lately. So what I'm trying to say is that, like, you know, right here you read about like how the Ohio Life Insurance Company, like, because they had like a lot of delinquent, like a lot of fraud related to like their books and stuff, that eventually like came out. It kind of led to like basically the bubble that had been rising or whatever, or accumulating, to burst. That was one of the like the things that caused it. So what I'm trying to say is that, to me, this kind of indicates that possibly like a lot of the things that seem too good to be true related to the U.S. economy, since the U.S. economy isn't really that stable, at least in my opinion. And that also, like, you know, the stock market is like heavily manipulated. I'm pretty sure everybody realizes that. Those things might start to come out in the next few months, or over the course of the next year. Specifically in the next few months, though, it seems to like be ramped up because, like I said, Neptune's conjunct the midheaven, but also on top of that, we're going to have a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. So Jupiter is a planet of expansion. It has a tendency to over-amplify whatever it touches. Generally, in astrology, Jupiter is considered a benefic planet, but that is not always the case, because Jupiter will tend to just kind of like overexpand whatever it touches. So like whatever it influences, it's going to be a big issue. It's going to be like a vast issue of some sort. So like, because we're having Jupiter meeting up with Neptune, these are two outer planets, this meetup or conjunction only happens like once every like 12 or 13 years. So it's really interesting that it's going to happen exactly like right on this like midheaven area for NYSE, because it kind of indicates that basically we may be able to expect something similar to what happened the last time that Neptune was on the midheaven, this Panic of 1857, but in this case it's even more worrisome because, like I said, Jupiter tends to expand whatever issues it's related to in a chart. So because it's relating here to the whole Neptunian, like fraud type deception thing, and also the midheaven social standing of NYSE, or the New York Stock Exchange, that's concerning, because it looks like it'll over amplify those concerns. So yeah, that's happening on April 12th of 2022. So that's a date to watch closely. Specifically March through April, as well as May, is a general time to really watch the New York Stock Exchange and like the stock market in general. Because like it looks like there could potentially be some events that take place. If we look back at one of the US's transits here, you can see that the US's natal Neptune, United States chart for the United States right here, you can see that the US's natal Neptune is at 22 degrees of Virgo, and the transiting Neptune happens to be right here in Pisces at 22 degrees of Pisces. So basically, transiting Neptune is opposite natal Neptune. That's why this period of time is like so wild, because you don't just have this Pluto return, which takes 248 years to come about. You also have this Neptune opposite Neptune thing happening, which has to do with like Neptune, like I said, is about deception. It's about psyops and things like that. So I think this transit is part of the reason why it's been very confusing to figure out what is real and what is fake with relation to like the news, as well as like anything you hear nowadays. I mean, it's just really hard to have like any confidence in anything that anybody says, because you just don't know what's real and what is fake, and that's very much a Neptune transit. That's what it's all about. It's all about like perception, deception, illusion. So anyways, the interesting thing here is that, like I said, the midheaven of NYSE is right here at 22 degrees of Pisces, meaning it's exactly opposite the natal Neptune of the US. So basically the natal Neptune of the US and the midheaven of NYSE are both going to be transited by this transiting Neptune. They're both going to be impacted because they match as far as like the exact degree goes. For the US, it'll be transiting Neptune opposite the natal Neptune, and for the chart of NYSE, it'll be transiting Neptune conjunct the midheaven of NYSE. So moving forward, this shows, okay, yeah, so on to the next bit as far as like of evidence indicating financial strife and concern and reasons why we should be concerned. Okay, so in another video, this video, The Coming Rise of Cryptocurrency and Silver, that I did like a year ago, I talked about how there was this progress cycle that seemed to occur every time there was a change in the monetary unit of the US. And it's a very specific cycle that occurs in the progress chart between Venus, right here, Saturn, and the Moon. So every time there appeared to be a stressful aspect or configuration formed between Venus, Saturn, and the Moon, that was whenever that seemed to like coincide with whenever they made a major change to the US dollar, as far as like changing whether it was paper currency or changing its status as a world reserve currency, etc., or even just like creating the US dollar in the first place or naming it the currency. Those are like all the events that were included. But if you want to like go back to that video and like look at what I was talking about there, that's what I'm referencing here. So this is the second iteration of that cycle, which occurred in 1862. So this was in the middle of the Civil War in the U.S. Now this progressed cycle here was a little bit difficult to like pinpoint exactly, but like I said, the progressed moon. So this shows the progress chart for the United States for the 25th of February, 1862. And as you can see here, progressed Venus was conjunct progressed Saturn, and both of them were opposite the progressed moon. The progressed moon moves about a degree per month. So this is pretty close here. Like as you can see, the progressed moon is only like 30 minutes off of an exact opposition with Venus, and then just like 3 months off of an exact opposition with Saturn. And also right here it's conjunct Chiron, but that's not part of the point. The point is that this like little configuration here seems to coincide with whenever there's a change in the monetary unit. And during the Civil War, this is like the little configuration that we saw, right? So Venus conjunct Saturn in Libra, opposite the moon in Aries. So at this time in 1862, this was the middle of the Civil War, but specifically on February 25th of 1862, they passed the Legal Tender Act. So the Civil War began in 1861, and like April of 1861, and only like 10 months after that, the U.S. government was like, oh no, we've run out of gold and we can't pay for the war. So in order to fund our operations, we're gonna have to create a greenback. So like paper currency, which is essentially worthless, and use that to pay for the war, essentially. And this was a highly unpopular move, and I think the only reason that they were ever like allowed to do it in the first place was because of the Civil War. I mean, it wasn't like anybody allowed them to do it, but because everybody was like so distracted with the Civil War, they were kind of able to pass this emergency major like life-changing or like permanent monetary system influencing decision, basically like a major economic decision that would permanently change the monetary system of the United States, as well as like drastically change like everybody's opinion as far as like what our money was worth and stuff. So like nobody wanted paper currency. That was like highly unpopular amongst the citizens, but because of the Civil War, they were like, the US government was like, oh, we have to make this emergency decision, etc., etc., and also they were all too busy fighting the war to go protest this. So it was kind of a convenient time for them to be passing this act because obviously they were all more concerned with bigger issues as far as like survival goes and fighting, etc. So anyways, February 25th of 1862, when they passed the Legal Tender Act and paper currency was made legal tender. So yeah, that was a very significant change to the US dollar because from this point forth, essentially paper currency was considered legal tender, and before that the only things that were considered legal tender were in the form of specie currency, which was like gold and silver coins, and citizens didn't want this because basically it meant that like the dollar, the US government could control the currency because they could just print as many paper dollars as they wanted to. And also, if the US government decided that they didn't want the dollar to be worth anything, they could just like cancel it and be like, oh, it's not worth anything now. As in, basically, their currency was entirely, the value of their currency was entirely reliant on the word of the government from this point forth, because before that, they could take their gold and silver coins and go to a different country and it would still be worth something because it's gold and silver coins and has tangible value and scarcity. So anyways, another thing that happened in 1862, or around this time, was this guy. This is Salmon P. Chase. I believe it is. I think it is, yeah. Anyways, Salmon P. Chase was named the Secretary of the Treasury at this time as well. So another pivotal change was that he ended up creating the national banking system. So that's why Chase Bank is named after him. So he created the national banking system, but again, they made all these decisions during the Civil War when everybody was distracted. Okay, so this whole Venus, Saturn, Moon iteration cycle that seems to coincide with whenever there are major changes made to the monetary unit. That occurred in 1862. There was another iteration in 1945, and then the most recent iteration occurred in 2020. So as you can see, we have the progressed Venus, opposite progressed Saturn, and squaring the progressed Moon. This was this chart is cast for December 21st of 2020. Now, another important thing to think about is that I think the reason why this progressed cycle it involves Venus and Saturn is because actually Venus, okay, well, Saturn rules the second house of the United States. So Saturn rules the sign of Capricorn. The second house is associated with the monetary unit, or like the monetary system. And then also Venus is the traditional ruler of the second house. So like normally the first house is associated with like things related to Aries. The second house is like things related to Taurus, and Venus rules Taurus. So Venus is technically very much already associated with like monetary units in general. So it's interesting to me that this progressed cycle that seems to coincide with whenever there are monetary changes to the monetary unit happens to involve Venus, which is the planet associated with like monetary things, values, etc., and Saturn, which rules the second house of the monetary unit of the US. So anyways, the most recent iteration of this cycle was in 2020. So specifically on December 21st of 2020, this was an interesting time because we had what is called a great conjunction. So first off, we'll talk about the progressed cycle. You can see that Venus is at 1 degree of Taurus, and it is opposite Saturn at 2 degrees of Scorpio, and both are squaring the moon at 1 degree of Aquarius. So this was the next iteration of this whole like monetary unit related cycle or whatever. And at this time, around this exact time, we had on December 21st of 2020, the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Now, this is really important because these great conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn specifically were used by a lot of ancient astrologers to predict the next 20 years to come. And if a conjunction is closer, it was considered to hold more significance than conjunctions that were farther apart. And this conjunction happened to be the closest Jupiter-Saturn conjunction to occur since 1623. And this conjunction was also very prominent because it happened to occur at 0 degrees of Aquarius. This is important because we have just entered, so like a lot of astrologers, myself included, believe that this marked the beginning of the age of Aquarius. So essentially, this conjunction was at the 0 degrees of Aquarius, but this also represented the Great Mutation, which I heard about recently, whereas it basically means that this was the first time that a great conjunction occurred in an air sign. For many, many centuries. So like for the past few centuries, all of these conjunctions have occurred in tangible signs like Capricorn or like Virgo or Taurus, so like earth signs associated with tangible things like currency that's like, like physical currency of some sort. And then this is the first time that we've had a conjunction occur in an air sign for a very long time. So a lot of astrologers believe that this marks the beginning of the age of Aquarius. And Aquarius happens to rule over crypto as well. So this is a very interesting time because basically my suspicion was that this period of time, like December of 2020, this great conjunction kind of indicated the beginning of the age of Aquarius, but also the beginning of like when crypto would become more of a mainstream thing. And also I think at about this time, this was when like the crypto market was like on the up and up. But the point is that this great conjunction, as well as a trigger that occurred, which also triggered this great conjunction thereafter, Because this occurred so closely to like, like this progressed configuration that seems to coincide with whenever there's a change in the monetary unit, I found this very interesting. So like, just to explain again, okay, so the changes in the monetary unit of the US seem to occur whenever there's a stressful formation between Venus, Saturn, and the moon. So you can see Venus, Saturn, and the moon, but this time, this was the first time that the moon was also involved with Pluto, or that Pluto was involved in this stressful configuration. Pluto is the planet of death, transformation, and rebirth. So it's very interesting that like Pluto was like kind of a focal point here for like this T-square formed between or like apex planet, or whatever. Basically like where all this energy is being pointed to the moon, it's also being pointed to Pluto, which is the planet of death. Pluto is also at the very last degree of Capricorn, which is the sign of like, if I had to categorize like traditional finance into like one sign, it would be Capricorn. So to have Pluto, the planet of death, really closely involved in this configuration, which is related to like changes in the monetary unit, and Pluto at the very last degree of Capricorn, as we're moving into Aquarius, which is associated with like cryptocurrency, which is very different from traditional finance as represented by Capricorn. So you have Pluto leaving Capricorn, moving into Aquarius, this transition itself being triggered by the progressed moon here, which itself is involved in like this like monetary unit change thing, right? As the progressed moon is moving into Aquarius, it's also being triggered by this major great conjunction that doesn't happen it only happens once every 20 years, and also it hasn't been this important or significant or prominent since 1623, and also happens to indicate, to like usher in the age of Aquarius. To have all of this coinciding with one another basically makes me think that we are we are in the transition from like tangible currency to cryptocurrency. So yeah, that's essentially the theory here, based off of like a number of like different things going on. Okay, so anyways, this point here, it's important to look at when this point is triggered, okay? So this occurred in December of 2020, and they say, like ancient astrologers who use these, they said it was important to look at when the location of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction would be triggered. Well, it was triggered. The first time it was triggered was actually March 6th of 2022. And this was by Venus and Mars, because Venus and Mars, funnily enough, like they were traveling through Capricorn together this whole time, like all throughout the 2 months, like, or the 3 months before this period, they were leading up to this point here. So basically, Venus and Mars were traveling together throughout Capricorn, but the point at which they finally conjuncted each other happened to be 0 degrees of Aquarius, meaning that they exactly triggered this great conjunction, which also occurred at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So this was a period of time when I was like, all right, this is when they're gonna like roll out some major stuff, like, anything related to like cryptocurrency, global governance, or like just some sort of major change related to like Aquarian things, like the collective consciousness and stuff like that. But yeah, so like cryptocurrency was definitely on the mind for that particular period of time. And if you look at the news for around March 6th of 2022, this was when Biden was like, oh, on March 9th of 2022, he was like, oh, we have, there's a sense of urgency and related to exploring the creation of a U.S. digital dollar. Shocker. So anyways, yeah, that's what happened. And back to the Pluto return. You can see the Pluto returns right here. And it was triggered, like I said, there. So another thing that I wanted to talk about really quick that I just recently noticed is that if you look at the progress chart of the New York Stock Exchange, right around now, you can see that there's like this little formation forming. So you can see that there's the progressed Jupiter at 24 degrees of Scorpio. That's square the progressed Uranus at 23 degrees of Leo. And then progressed Uranus is opposite Pluto at 21 degrees of Aquarius. And this progressed Pluto is also squaring progressed Jupiter. This is important because these are all outer planets, and they're forming this like little exact configuration with one another, which doesn't occur very often. It's quite rare. Also, it's interesting to mention that progressed Saturn is also like kind of involved here, so it's like forming a conciliation pattern. But anyways, basically, conciliation pattern means it's just like trining and sextiling both sides of the opposition, which makes up this T-square. So you can see that the progressed Jupiter is in conjunct, which is a 150-degree angle to progressed Saturn. So this is quite an exact configuration. Like, it's not exact, but it's pretty prominent, and it doesn't occur very often. Like I've said, progressed aspects take forever to happen. And this area, like right here, this area right here, which is one of the major parts of this whole like configuration here, is being triggered quite a lot. So like these degrees of Aquarius, I talked about it in the last video, but they seem to be coming up a lot, like around like 18 degrees, 19 degrees, 20 degrees of Aquarius seems to be pretty prominent in a few different charts. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. But yeah, so you can see here that the progressed in May of 2022, the progressed Venus is at 19 degrees of Aquarius. Progressed Pluto is at 21 degrees of Aquarius. And if you look over here, this is the progressed chart of the United States for around that same time in May of 2022. And we have the progressed moon conjuncting progressed Mercury at about 21 degrees of Aquarius, exactly conjunct the progressed Pluto of NYSE, which is interesting. Now you also look at Biden's chart, and he has his own progressed sun at 18 degrees of Aquarius. So NYSE progressed chart, the US's progressed chart, and Biden's progressed chart all seem to have something prominent at 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 degrees of Aquarius. Another interesting thing to mention is that, like, as you can see here, transiting Saturn is going to be transiting over this range of Aquarius for the next few months. And as it does this, it's also going to be like opposing NYSE's progressed Uranus, squaring NYSE's progressed Jupiter, etc., etc. Another interesting thing to note is that if you look at Biden's chart to see how this transiting Saturn is impacting him, he's going to have transiting Saturn hitting his ascendant this whole time. So it's going to be transiting Saturn hitting his progressed sun, and then transiting Saturn hitting his progressed ascendant, which may or may not be prominent, but I mean, I find it interesting. Now, also another interesting thing to note, if we look back at the chart of NYSE, is that earlier in this video we talked about a couple of eclipses. There was one at 27 degrees of Taurus on November 19th of 2022, which would have opposed NYSE's progressed Jupiter. But the more important eclipse for NYSE is the one that will be occurring on May 16th of 2022. So it'll be a lunar eclipse conjuncting the progressed Jupiter of NYSE, which is like the middle, the apex of this T-square here. So I find that particular period of time, like around May 16th of 2022, to be interesting. For March of 2022 throughout the end of May 2022 is a particularly interesting time for the New York Stock Exchange as well as the stock market in general. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that, so we were talking about a chart that was from 2022. So like we were talking about this formation, right? That you're beginning to see form, right? And I do have concerns about the stock market short term, like seriously, but also we're leading into like an exact configuration here. So you can see that Venus is at 19 degrees. So there's a lot of other stressful factors that I discussed before with regards to like Neptune and the progressed Venus-Saturn configuration that seems to indicate whenever the monetary unit changes. But right here you can see that we're beginning to head into this, and that's why I am concerned about the stock market for a variety of other reasons. But as you can see, we're beginning to head into this very, very major configuration here. And Venus is at 19 degrees of Aquarius. Pluto is at 21 degrees of Aquarius, or well, 22 degrees of Aquarius. So the time when this configuration actually becomes exact is around September 17th of 2024. Around that time, shortly after that, that's when we'll have Venus at 22 degrees, almost at 22 degrees here. Just a few days off of 22 degrees or a couple weeks or something. So Venus exactly conjuncting Pluto at 22 degrees. Both of those planets opposing, or both of those celestial bodies opposing Uranus and squaring Jupiter. So this is a really crucial time because it is not often in history that you'll ever get something this prominent. And I don't want to make any vast assumptions, but to me, this doesn't just look like a crash. This looks like possibly the end of NYSE. But I mean, that's a pretty bold statement. But anyways, I digress. So Another thing that's interesting is that you can see how the, you see these semi-squares right here? How it's all exact and it forms this almost like freaky looking formation. Freaky looking formation. But anyways, during this month, September of 2024, the progressed moon is going to be squaring progressed Mercury exact. And then it's going to be completing this interesting formation. So I kind of have to wonder if something could happen in September of 2024 that's like huge. And also I picked this date because in September of 2024, that's when we're going to have a lunar eclipse at 25 degrees of Pisces. And throughout this whole video, I keep on talking about like, oh, you know, 22 to 24 degrees of Pisces, etc., etc. So you know that like 24 degrees of Pisces is like conjunct the midheaven of NYSE. So this eclipse, I think it's a lunar eclipse. Yeah, lunar eclipse is going to be conjunct the midheaven of NYSE, and it's also going to be conjunct the IC, so like the home foundation or whatever, exact of the US itself. So that's interesting. And then also, if you look at later in 2025, there's going to be a matching lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo right here on March 14th of 2025. And that will be conjunct the IC, so the foundation of the New York Stock Exchange. And then it's also going to be the same eclipse. It's going to be hitting the midheaven of the United States chart. So that's interesting. Now, as far as like this formation I was talking about over here goes, this is a particular time to watch, like September of 2024. And then also, if you look at May of 2025, that's when the progressed moon is going to be square the sun, and it's also going to be hitting Mars. So you see a lot of these different planets at the same degrees. So you see Pluto and Venus at around the same degree. Similar degree to Uranus, similar degree to Saturn down here, similar degree to Jupiter. Then separately you have the moon at a similar degree to the sun and a similar degree to Mars. So like this is why I think that this particular, I think right now we're leading into a very important time that's going to affect the New York Stock Exchange. So I'm still quite fearful of a crash this year, but I kind of have to wonder what exactly is going to happen in 2024 to 2025 because this looks incredibly prominent. And yeah, so anyways, I also wanted to mention that the reason that I brought up that whole progress chart from 1857, like the 1862, sorry, was because this one from the Civil War, that was because it ties in with this year in a very particular way, as in we have a lot of things in common with that time. So if we just look at United States of America and you look at, this was the Civil War progress chart that we were talking about. The reason why this was so important was because at this time, we had this progress formation, right? But then shortly before this, like I said, we had the 1857 panic. So Neptune was conjunct the midheaven, meaning that basically we have right now in 2022 two things in common with what we had during the Civil War. Right now we still have this Venus-Saturn progress configuration going on right now, which seems to coincide with whenever there are changes in the monetary unit. But at the same time, we also have Neptune hitting the midheaven of NYSE. And the only other time when we had those two events happening at the same time was the Civil War when they introduced paper currency. So that's why I went through that. And that's why that was the part of the cycle that I picked out to show you guys. Also, another eclipse that I find interesting is this one, the one occurring on April 30th of 2022, because this eclipse will be conjunct Uranus. It'll be a solar eclipse conjunct Uranus right over here, and Uranus rules cryptocurrency. So to me, this looks like a potential new beginning of some sort for crypto. You know, possibly new regulations or some sort are put forth, or crypto is adopted more globally at this time. So yeah, that pretty much covers essentially everything I wanted to talk about. I hope that wasn't too tremendously confusing. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Also, if you guys want to if you might be confused, this is my new YouTube channel. If you want to check out the old videos that I had, they were on this channel over here, and I will put a link in the description for this channel, the old channel where this video is. But I think I might copy this old video onto my new channel anyway, so you guys can see it if you want to refer to it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe and see you next time.